Hey everybody, welcome back to the Blindsiders. I'm your host, Brian. Ben and Dylan have checked out on the season as it's so bad. Only kidding. They had a prior obligation. So, doing a solo episode today, which I think, as thunder and lightning claps behind me, don't know if you can hear that, a good, I guess, sign or something at least that lines up with how we're all feeling about this pretty bad season at this point. So we got to say goodbye to Mary, which, is quite sad. She was a scrappy underdog from her original tribe, last member of her original tribe, made it all the way to Final Seven. Pretty good. She lamented in this episode that she lost all of her friends along the way: Stephanie, Kevin, David, now as well, and Star last episode. And you know what? It's hard to make friends on Survivor, but I really do think she made a friend in David, considering he stood to salute her on her way out. Very strange, but also in an episode that was pretty boring, an interesting moment nonetheless. So for this episode, I think it's mostly just a story of blue balls, would be the best way to put it, where we get these confessionals from players like Camilla and Mary, and even Mitch to a certain extent, where it's like, we have to make this move. I'm glad Mitch was finally potentially on board with something. But in order to make the move, we need Kyle. And Kyle is in this very weird situation where we talked about it last week, right? Where he's potentially in a good spot to win the game, given that people might be upset with Joe and Eva. And if the final three is Joe, Eva, and Kyle, he might win as a kind of spite vote. So from his perspective, he's like, I'm kind of in it with a chance. Yes, it's boring, it's not entertaining, but if I do make a more entertaining move, I probably lessen my chance to actually get a victory here. So we go back and forth with him where he's like struggling. Do I betray Joe and Eva and my potential win, or do I betray my day one in Camilla? And if I go with Camilla, am I more likely to lose here? So I think it is interesting, and I can't 100% blame him, especially if he wins the game, for these decisions. For Joe and Eva, obviously, they want to keep everything status quo because they are in great positions to go to the end, so I can't really blame them. Shaheen, I think, is more interesting. So Shaheen, in this episode, said that he felt like he was playing a better game than Joe and Eva, specifically Joe, and that's why he was potentially hesitant to flip. What we're hearing from other players is Joe is playing the better game in the sense that he's the bigger threat to win. So it's one thing to feel like you're playing the better game, but ultimately your perception doesn't matter. It's the perception of the players who you're playing against and who are going to be on the jury. So if he gets to the end and loses, I think this is like the blind spot where he's like, oh, well, I'm doing great. I'm going to the end. But oftentimes when you're like the second guy in an alliance with multiple men, you're kind of treated as less than the alpha in that alliance. And I do think that Joe is perceived as the alpha and as such is getting the bulk of the credit for the alliance's success here. Does that mean that people won't be, willing to vote for Shaheen in the same way they would Kyle? I don't think so, but I think we've gotten a lot of content of Kyle being like, here's how I can win, or I can't screw over my potential jury votes. And we haven't necessarily gotten the same amount of winner content from Shaheen until this episode where he says he believes that he's playing better than Joe, but I don't think it's been presented to us as he is playing any better than Joe, or that the credit for their tandem moves would go to him over Joe. So I think that's a real blind spot for him, and why he's not flipping might ultimately be his downfall here. So we have these four players who all think if they just get to the end with any combination of it, they can be the winner. And then we have these three players who just want to get to the end by any means necessary, as Mary just kind of went off and tried to work every possible angle she could. Unfortunately, it didn't work, despite us as viewers being like, just making good points. It's not happening. So I think it was probably the most interesting part of this episode was the immunity challenge. I really, really enjoyed it. I thought it was an interesting challenge. And the fact that Joe almost won but lost, and then Camilla was able to win, it almost felt like it was setting up perfectly for this Joe blindside. And I know Eva has her trinkets, her idol, and her safety without power, but she almost got another one when she had a journey, which is just especially unlucky that she was the one who went on the journey for knowledge is power when she didn't need it. Whereas like Mary goes on that journey, which she did volunteer to, but they quickly shut it down. She would have very much benefited because it's kind of open where the idols are with Eva, and she could have taken Eva's idol or her safety without power, probably her idol though. And that's just a bad roll of the dice for the producers. There was a little bit of controversy I saw online, and I wish they had kind of made it more clear. So Eva stacks the 4 rows that she needs in order to keep her vote. She begins stacking toward 8, but then decides not to. And then she kicks it over. But there's still time on the clock. I figured it was like, okay, you have to have this by the time it's over, but it has to stay up till it's over, right? That would make sense to me, because anything can happen. You can have a great stack and the wind comes and blows it over, and now you're scrambling to get it back. So really interesting that she was able to just kind of dip out on that challenge there. But I guess it must have been clarified, or a producer on site must have said it was fine. I did like the challenge. I think it would be cool as an immunity challenge, perhaps in the future there. But yeah, just another wet fart of a journey here on Survivor. And so we get back to the immunity challenge. Camilla wins, which is great. Very exciting, very tense ending to the challenge, with Joe almost winning and putting the wrong piece in. And then Camilla bringing Eva and Mitch along with her to the reward in order to kind of placate Eva, keep her calm, and make sure that the potential for a blindside is there, and allow Mary to work Kyle more at this, while they're separated from one another. But unfortunately, they just weren't willing to take a shot, and it's very disappointing. As for anything else from the episode, I think Eva's definitely wearing out her welcome with viewers. I think the scene where she was calling out Mary for her coconut etiquette was extremely shitty, given that Mary's very clearly on the bottom here, and she is not getting picked for any of these rewards. So she is only getting food from what's at camp, and it doesn't look like they're fishing. They don't have any rice because they didn't opt out this season for it. And Eva, on the other hand, is constantly being picked to come along on these rewards, or winning immunity and getting advantages while at rewards. So kind of crazy to me that Eva would call Mary out. it did remind me a little bit of like in Big Brother when the Dominant Alliance knows that they're just gonna pick off the Minority Alliance and the kind of start acting shitty toward them, like to ice them out in some ways, and that's what it felt like here. I know Camilla also agreed with it, but I didn't know if that was more of like a game thing, or maybe there really was some consternation surrounding the coconut etiquette. But that was probably the big standout scene, and the scene where like people are very tired of Eva, at least in like the more online spaces. I think it's like a frustration one with like stuff like that, but two with just like nobody's going after her, no one's going after Joe. This episode would have been perfect to go after either of them, and now we're kind of set up for potentially boring endgame. The only hope that we really have here is that these players start turning on one another, right? They begin to realize that $1 million check is right there. The end of the game is right there, and the only way to ensure that they get it is if they make moves where they take out their biggest competition. So I'm hopeful that'll happen, but I'm not confident that it will. In fact, I'm almost confident that it won't happen, and that we're just gonna have the end of the game be Kyle, Shaheen, Joe, and Eva, and probably Kyle and Shaheen making fire, and I think Kyle winning. So that's me calling my shot there. So I hope you enjoyed this solo episode of the Blindsiders. If you did, please subscribe. This channel is, of course, Better Radio, where we have all of our podcasts. We also have our main channel, which is Wicked Everything, where we do op-eds, usually about video games, sometimes about pop culture, television, and movies as well. Then we have our Those Fake Nerds channel, which is nerd and pop culture news, and our sports channel, which is sports news, and that is Wicked Good Sports. You can follow me on Twitter at FakeBMar, that's BMARR, or Brian Marr on Blue Sky. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.